Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on accelerating domain-specific AI model training on private data with NVIDIA and Tonic.ai. My name is Chiara Colombi. I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Tonic.ai, and I am delighted to be joined by two thought leaders in the AI space who will share their industry insights with us today. Brad Genereaux is the global lead for healthcare alliances at NVIDIA, responsible for developer relations within medical imaging and digital health. He is at the forefront of imaging interoperability within the healthcare ecosystem, having been deeply involved with the development and implementation of DICOM, HL7, and IHE. On his mission to make healthcare better for patients and clinicians alike, Brad evangelizes the adoption of and integration of AI in digital health solutions into everyday clinical practice. Thank you, Brad, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and this is going to be fantastic.
Yes, very excited. Adam Kamor is a co-founder and the head of engineering at Tonic.ai. He holds a PhD in physics from Georgia Tech. At Tonic, he leads the development of data generation solutions that are transforming the work of fellow developers, data scientists, and data engineers alike. In particular, he spearheads our platform for unstructured data redaction and synthesis, Tonic.ai, through which we work with many companies in the healthcare space and beyond. Thank you, Adam, for joining us.
Hi, glad to be here. Very excited to chat with you and Brad today.
Yeah. So building, training, and leveraging AI to maximize what seems to be its boundless potential has been all we've been talking about since ChatGPT first released, which is like just over 2 years ago, kind of hard to believe. But what I'm finding fascinating more recently are the conversations we're having around the guardrails that we should be putting in place, both guardrails to make AI more specific so that it's tailored to a specific domain or use case, and guardrails to make AI more secure. In both instances, leveraging proprietary data is key. So today's topic couldn't be more relevant to that conversation. It seems contradictory, but the next big breakthroughs in AI will be thanks to the incorporation of guardrails. So we've got a lot of questions lined up for each of you. And we also hope to have some time at the end to address audience questions as well. So you out there in the audience, if you do have a question you would like to pose to our speakers, please submit them by way of the Q&A functionality of Zoom. You can find that in the nav bar along the bottom of your Zoom webinar window. We're going to do our best to get to as many as we can. We're sure we're going to have a lot too, though. You might also see some answers come in by way of comments on the questions. We've got a couple of members of Tonic's AI team in the audience who will be typing some answers to your questions too. All right, so with all that out of the way, let's get started with a couple of, setting the stage questions for both of you. And my first question is, why is private data emerging as the next frontier for AI, and how does it shape a business's competitive advantage?
Brad, you want me to go first?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I think private data is going to be crucial for this kind of next phase of LLM development, because increasing parameter counts of your models can only get you so far. The training of these models is a very data hungry, intensive process. And a lot of the publicly available data has already kind of been combed through and used. So if you want your models to keep improving beyond increasing parameter counts, you need to start feeding them data they haven't seen before. And that's going to be the sensitive data sitting behind company firewalls. And of course, we're here today to talk about how we can do that responsibly.
Yeah, I would add that we are seeing for example, in the hospital space, so much last mile customization. So for example, you might imagine that a care plan for a patient who presents at the ER with, difficulty breathing, the hospital would have certain protocols that they follow, but it's going to be customized based on the hospital itself, based on the region, based on the nation, for the types of things. What blood work do they order first? What exams do they order next? What drugs do we use to potentially treat this? All of these things are going to be customized. And so as we build out these models that are connecting with our workflows, we need to be able to bring in that local last mile content into the work that we're doing. And this applies to both the health data of what we have on our patients, but also the business of the hospital and the regions themselves.
Hey, Brad, Kara, can I ask Brad a question?
Of course.
Great. Brad knows a lot about healthcare. I do too, but I think Brad knows a lot more. Brad, I think in that example, what I took from that is, using the patient's own medical history to help an AI system inform decisions, obviously is a great idea. do you see a path for where healthcare providers are also kind of building models on, populations of patients and their medical histories to help inform treatment of individuals?
I do, but not in the, I say maybe not in the way that you framed it. So, for example, oncology would be a great example, right? Because we have hospital enterprises that specialize only in oncology treatment, right? And then outside of oncology, you're going to have like specialty clinics, specialty programs like a diabetes program, or like I don't know, a kidney treatment program or a liver treatment program. And within those centers of excellence, we will absolutely see that, if we look at, the liver, for example, all of the liver research coming in from, I don't know if it's liver research organizations or, the specialty societies around these, care specialties, to bring in the research, to bring in the care protocols. I could see that as being something that we would be training up specialized models at the end of the day for.
Got it.
I wouldn't say that a hospital kind of horizontally would be doing that. It would be these kind of, these vertical stacks within the horizontal of a healthcare enterprise.
And more training on research and hospital protocols, less on like the patient medical histories for like populations.
Yes, I'd say so. Yes,
Okay.
I'd say when we look at leveraging healthcare data like around patients, we would be looking more at the clinical trials side, the IRB side, all of that work to inform research that's going on. But it's all would be within the protocols within clinical trials or research activities that a healthcare an academic healthcare enterprise would be undertaking.
Right. Interesting. Thank you.
Yep.
Interesting. I hadn't heard the term last mile used in that context of model training. I really like that. Gonna be using that in my marketing going forward. So on the flip side of like the advantages, what are the hurdles that companies are facing when they're transitioning from public to proprietary data in their AI strategies?
Brad, would you like to go first this time?
What I've found, talking with partners kind of all around the healthcare space, it is that access to data is a huge problem. Data within the four walls of the hospital, and using it to inform research, using it to inform even the development of care pathways, internally is hard enough, but possible. But as soon as you start to have outside enterprises wanting to create foundational models or even fine-tuning models of last mile, you can't get that data out because of privacy reasons is the primary the primary use case as to what's the barrier. But that's probably the main one that I would absolutely see, and hearing that the pain that is we're seeing in this space right now.
That's right. I mean, the barrier is expressed in 5 letters, and it's HIPAA. It's HIPAA. I think definitely, using data within the four walls of a hospital or within a payer, I agree it's challenging. I think the next real hurdle is going to be how do we train models on, a population in order to like make determinations on individuals in a healthcare context or without. And what I expect needs to happen is then like the real hurdle is like the models that we're now training are generative, meaning they spit out new text and new information. And with the generative model, you don't want to embed customer PHI or PII into model weights, because whatever you train on and whatever gets embedded into your model weights runs the risk of being regurgitated. So, if I train a model on the data from, customers or patients A, B, and C, and then I use it during inference for customer D or patient D, you don't want that inference call to kind of leak data from the initial training data set. So how do we solve that problem is one that I'm particularly interested in, giving that's kind of like, the motivation behind a lot of what Tonic does.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one thing, it's always when talking about this, I always try to take great pains to say HIPAA itself is not a barrier because it is absolutely there for all of the right reasons,
Yes.
to protect our patients, to protect our physicians, to protect the hospital enterprises. But the question is, how do we do this safely? How do we do this appropriately? How do we do this in a privacy preservation type of way? And work with the constructs that HIPAA and all the other frameworks that are out there, that also, I mean, coming from Canada, we had PEPITA and a couple of other frameworks that we would use as well. It's just so important that we work within those to be able to drive the science forward.
The healthcare industry, in a way, is kind of lucky they have HIPAA. So, we deal with, many different industries, healthcare being just one of them. At least with HIPAA, you have clear guidelines on what you can and cannot do. In other industries, they also have sensitive data, but they lack the guidelines. So it's much more of a gray area, which can lead to a lot more risk in many situations. So, in this case, the guidelines, they do actually help because it's clear cut or more clear cut.
Yeah.
Industry should be advocating for more regulations in a way. That way they at least know what they need to be doing. Well, some of what you've been saying segues perfectly into my next question, which is for you, Adam. What types of solutions are helping organizations safely tap into proprietary data for model training?
Sure. So by look, tapping into could mean a lot of different things. I'll tell you where I spend most of my time. Where I spend most of my time, and this is where I see our customers also spending most of their time, because I work with customers all day, is, okay, I have a large amount of data. Typically, it's unstructured in the healthcare space. Think about things like medical records, lab reports, medical imaging like DICOM, et cetera. I have all this data sitting over here. It's for model training purposes, it's practically radioactive. Like if I want to go train any type of generative model on this data, like it's, just beware because of the issue I talked about earlier about model weights. So I find most of our customers, at least in the healthcare industry, are trying to figure out how they can actually get value out of this data in a way that adheres to the law and to regulations and to just general ethics. So tapping into it, I think like typically what you want to do is you either need to take your data through like a safe harbor or expert determination process so that you can kind of, with confidence, use the data in a safe way. And there's, whether you're going through safe harbor or expert determination, typically the first step is being able to identify sensitive elements within your unstructured data. And then depending on which path you're going down, safe harbor or expert determination, comes the next task of, okay, well, how do we kind of deal with these sensitive entities we're finding in a way that kind of adheres to the regulation, but maintains the utility of the data for training? And obviously for anyone that has that particular problem, I encourage you to try out Textual. And especially for any folks in the call that are using NVIDIA Curator today, please look forward to some cool integrations that are going to come out between Tonic and NVIDIA in this regard as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. So thinking kind of ahead to once you've got those solutions in place to the promised land, Brad, in your experience, what new capabilities open up once businesses fully harness their private data sets?
That's a fantastic question. I say the capabilities that could be opened up are pretty limitless, but we can categorize them in a couple of different ways. We can look at it from a lot of times we start from the clinical, where we say, hey, now that we can train, models, foundational models, let's use that to help us identify disease. Let's use this to help us identify patients at risk, that we could look to triage sooner if we have insights that could inform our clinicians in the actions that they could potentially take to bubble up risk cases. So there's a lot of things that we could do on the clinical side. But then also on the administrative side, there's a variety of things that we could do to help in cost savings, to help in driving more efficiencies within clinics, to help us do things, for example, to leverage our infrastructure more efficiently. Like, for example, I could use computer vision to help me, computer vision and other AI techniques to identify patients at risk that would be coming back to the clinic within 30 to 60 days, and to keep that data on fast local storage versus let's say slower archival layer of storage. And that can result in saving hospital enterprises hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. So we could use AI to help us streamline our hospital operations of how we actually bring patients through the system. How do we drive their care plans? How do we staff the clinics, according to what we can predict what's happening? So there's so much that we could potentially do, but it really takes combining what we know about the local hospital enterprises to tune models that we could then leverage back, in the clinic to help drive what's happening at the hospitals forward.
Yeah, and I'd actually like to talk a little bit more about those differences between the domain-specific models and the generalized models. In what ways do the domain-specific models really outshine generalized models? If there's anything you want to add to that, and to talk more about industries that have the potential to benefit the most.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, certainly on the computer vision side, there's tremendous differences from, if I use the traditional computer vision techniques to, for example, what I use to identify pedestrians and bicyclists and boxes in a factory and say, let's look for tumors and, strokes and brain bleeds. Doing that in a agnostic way or like not specific to healthcare can only take us so far. But once we actually take clinical data that we've annotated, X-rays and CTs and MRIs, and be able to train something that understands voxels, models that can understand not so much the pixels that we see on the screen, but understand that it's not pixels at all, but actually the rendition of those pixels based on the energy signatures of radiation going through the body and hitting a film plate behind the patient, being able to understand that and allows us to create more appropriate models that are far more enriched when we actually try to drive insights that we would then give to our radiologists and the referring physicians that are ordering these different exams. We see this on the large language model side as well, where we've got these phenomenal 4 or 5 billion parameter models that know every single piece of information that's ever been captured since the dawn of time that's in the public sphere. But understanding medical literature, understanding drug formularies, understanding care plans, understanding the science behind how we treat patients, these things, especially when we do that deviation for regions or hospitals themselves, become super important. And that last mile component of it is what is lost if we just say, let's just take the best and brightest of, what's out there today. They do a great job. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've been blown away by how these models perform, even on working with HL7 Fire and working with DICOM headers, the things that they're able to do. And it will take us very far, but will it take us to the end? I don't think so, especially when we're getting into the realm of clinical trials and getting into the realm of this kind of, research and precision medicine informing how we are, intervening on patients' behalves.
Adam, anything you were going to add? If not, I've got a question that, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Brad is 99% right, maybe 95% right. He's mostly right. I'm like somewhat more, it's going to be hard for me to articulate this. I am somewhat more optimistic about non-domain specific large language models, just like the base foundational models that are out there. Brad, as you said, they constantly just like blow me away in what they're going to do. Like I'm sitting there ready to go fine tune a model and I'm like, well, hold on. And then all of a sudden, just like adjusting that prompt a little more actually gets me exactly what I was looking for. And God, over time, I mean, who knows what's going to happen with these foundational models? I kind of suspect that the large, foundational providers out there are going to start training on more data behind company firewalls as they kind of get contractual access to it and legal access to it. And look, a well-built domain-specific model, I think, is still always going to win. But that requires money. It requires expertise. So, for folks that are just starting out with this, I guess my advice would be, don't give up on, OpenAI GPT-4o, for example, and a clever prompt, and don't jump straight into the fine tuning. But yeah, I mean, Brad, you're right. It's domain specific, if done well, is always going to be pretty impressive.
Yeah, and there's a number of different tiers here, right? Because you can go from prompt engineering to LoRa's and to RAGs, and then ultimately to creating the foundational models themselves, right? So
Yeah, I
depending on
think
where you
that
need
is
to
the
go.
path, by the way.
Yeah,
Like that those are the correct order of stepping stones, I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
agreed. Yeah.
Okay.
So I have another specific question for you around, what specific types of organizations should be doing. And was wondering if you could talk a bit about smaller organizations that might have limited but still sensitive data. How are they building effective specialized AI when their data is limited?
That's
Interesting.
yeah,
Oh,
that's
were you going to speak, Brad? I'm sorry.
yeah, no, go ahead.
So there's a few things at play here. They're actually, I agree, smaller organizations will sometimes have less data. Um, they have an advantage though, and typically, of course, small organizations also have to adhere to ethics, the law, regulations, compliance, but they typically have a lot less red tape as it comes to like less red tape and less fear of trying new technologies.
Hmm.
That they also typically have like legal frameworks in place that were kind of designed and developed after the advent of some of these AI systems came around. So it's typically easier for them to actually start training, right? Now, do they have enough data to train, which is what you're really asking? Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, is what I see with our customers. And they have a few options that they can do if they don't have enough data, right? They can try to partner with other organizations and companies, assuming legally they're permitted to do so, which can be a real challenge. They can try to acquire data via some marketplace. There are providers out there that will sell expertly determined or safe harbored data, which they can try to use. That typically can affect like model training quality if you're using like poorly de-identified data, for example. You have to be careful there. You want to de-identify it properly, or they can attempt to synthesize new data,
Yep.
right? And that's where I think that will be the future. We're I think in some use cases we're already there, and others we're very close. Being able to take a collection of N documents, maybe they're transcripts that are spoken word between patient and provider, and then being able to take those and then kind of synthesize a new batch that's 10, 20, 100 times the size is your other option. And folks can, probably people are familiar with this terminology, synthetic data. And that's obviously the approach that I encourage our customers to take. And it's the approach that Tonic primarily invests in for generating additional training data.
Yeah, I would also echo that. We are absolutely seeing this kind of next click into the generation of synthetic data as being really important not just in healthcare, but really across all the different streams of generative AI and AI solutions, across the board. As an example, what we're seeing in the realm of, robotic infrastructure, and not even robots like robots that are moving, but just robots that are serving the needs of executing upon tasks. We need to have this realm of simulation, as well as for training our models, and then where we're actually doing our inference. This is a three computer solution that really takes into account not only like we need to have an appreciation. I mean, another way of thinking about it is a digital twin. I might have a digital twin of myself, or I might have a digital twin of the hospital. I might have a digital twin of a department, and being able to synthesize and simulate what's actually happening to this digital twin entity becomes really important. And in order to do that, I need to have a complete workup of synthetic data of what's actually happening in that space where I don't have the actual truth, like that's physically happening. I need to be able to have that synthetic realm for me to actually do my work in before I can deliver upon that inference. And so we're seeing this across the board, and I think 2025 will be the year in that this marriage of synthetic data with AI solutions is going to really take off.
Brad,
Interesting.
that's very interesting. I like that 2025 is the year. I hope you're right. Um, the example you gave with like training data for like robotics, I don't know a lot about this area, but my suspicion is with that type of training data, you can kind of generate it via simulation from first principles.
Yep.
And so that is an area where it's rife for synthetic data. Like that's great. In a lot of other areas, like you can't do that. For example, maybe you want to synthesize patient claims data for an insurance company. You're not going to do that from first principles in general, or transcribed audio calls between patients and providers. Are you seeing customers starting to synthesize those types of data sets as well that can't be done via simulation?
I have seen, so it depends on the use case. Um, I'd say that I've seen a lot of synthetic generation of healthcare data to help inform crafting foundational models,
Yeah.
but not in the, I'd say I haven't seen it in this new generation of really generative AI informing that. I've seen nuggets of it. I've started to see that take off, but
Right.
certainly when I think about, if we go back to, sepsis detection, which is a very classical AI healthcare data problem. There's a lot of synthetic generation of data that we might use, even to take the generalized models and then craft it into what a particular EMR and what they generate at a particular institution, right? So there's going to be that connectivity into what's happening locally. That is still a realm of synthetic generation, even if it's informed by real
Right.
data, right?
Yeah.
So,
Certainly a more tractable problem, at least.
right,
uh,
exactly.
which is also nice. Yeah, I think this new phase of being able to do it not via transformation and not from just like first principle simulations. I agree that is like the next phase of this, and the technology is like rapidly improving in this area. It's really
Rapidly.
wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's
cool.
so exciting. Yeah.
I know every day it's like there's something new out there, and I mean it's hard to actually keep track of it all. It's annoying from that point of view, but it's good.
So we talked about synthesis in terms of like scaling up data or creating data where there is none, but I also wanted to touch on synthesis as a solution for, de-identifying data. And in particular, Adam, I wanted to ask you your thoughts on like best practices for teams who are deciding whether to redact their data, just purely redact it, like
Okay.
by tokenization versus synthesizing.
Okay. In either case, so I'll provide an example of this so we're all on the same page. Let's say we have a medical note, like a doctor writes the notes on the patient after their checkup for the year. So, just a paragraph or two of unstructured text. And now the question is, okay, we need to first identify all of the sensitive information within the text. And then it's a decision of, okay, do we take the note and now remove sensitive identifiers and replace them with like tokens and redact? Or do we replace the sensitive identifiers with synthetic values that look and feel real, but they're fake? For example, like change the name Adam Kamor to John Smith. That would be a synthetic value. Whereas, replacing Adam Kamor with a redacted value would just be like patient name, as an example, right? So the first step in either case is you have to identify the sensitive information. And that alone is a real challenge, right? There's a lot of techniques out there. The technique that Tonic primarily uses for this is a set of, built in-house fine-tuned Roberta models for doing this task, which is called named entity recognition. So once you've identified your sensitive entities, the consideration that you should take for whether you synthesize or redact would typically be what you're going to do with the data. Like if you plan on taking this data and then training a model, you typically are going to synthesize a new medical note. And the reason is you want your training data to look as close as possible to the data that will ultimately be inferenced on the model once it's trained, right? So a synthetic version of the note is going to be much more relatable and closer, closer in similarity to like, actual real medical notes. And hence you'll get a typical better like resultant model. De-identification is useful for other situations though. Or rather redaction, excuse me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Brad, is there anything you would add around how you're seeing healthcare organizations respond to the challenges of leveraging PHI in AI development?
No, I think Adam's pretty much covered it. I mean, having been, involved in this and even in the earlier days of let's take reports and, redact the patient names or other things. There's so much there that could potentially be used to re-identify the patients. Not just the patient name or the date of birth, but also, why they're there at the hospital. We can correlate that to, a patient who's in a car accident to news that came out around that time period for that particular town to correlate someone's patient records back. There's a lot of risk there. There's a lot of, concern as we're going through that process. And then also on the aside from the privacy preservation nature, we also have to be very careful about not losing the intrinsic value of being able to have a connected healthcare record that has been anonymized. And what I mean by that is, a point in time, here is a note, a nursing note about Brad the patient, and the care that I had received. But it's important that I carry through not only the nursing note, but why was I there? What drugs was I on? What imaging exams did I have? Both pixel payloads as well as the reports. There's that entire care story for Brad the patient, and not only around even the disease that I might be treated on, but everything else that as a patient I might be experiencing. If I anonymize that and pull those things out, I might be damaging, permanently that story that could be then used to train next generation models. And so I need to balance both the how do I protect my patients, because that is the number one most important thing, but how do I also ensure that I don't lose the value that this data has when it's connected into a broader ecosystem. And then, sorry, I would also just tack on, even outside of the patient's journey, and that the patient who might have 3 or 4 different diseases and have a bunch of interactions and treatments and interventions and everything else. I might also be looking at care pathways across a specialty or across a physician group or across a department let's say oncology department 1 and oncology department 2 across 2 different hospitals in the same state. I might want to be crafting models horizontally in such a way. And again, if I anonymize my data in a way that damages the fabric, I'm going to lose that intrinsic value.
Yeah, I think it's always helpful to think about data as just telling a story, because that's when you realize there's so much nuance. Stories have nuance. Patients have nuance to each of their stories. So we talked.
Can I provide some practical advice to the audience that is it's a synthesis or summary maybe of what Brad is saying. One, there's a privacy utility trade-off that you always have to make. If you want your data to be more private, typically the utility of the data is going to go lower. So you have to choose the right balance to strike there that's appropriate for your use case and also for your patients or customers' privacy. Two, healthcare specific, if you want to do a safe harbor de-identification of your data, typically a lot of the intrinsic value of the data can be wiped out. And oftentimes the utility will get very low when you do a safe harbor de-identification. Okay? In that situation, you'll find that going down the expert determination path is typically what you should do, because that allows for a more nuanced approach to how you remove and synthesize given sensitive identifiers. And it typically will lead to a higher utility of data. And a lot of folks get concerned about doing expert determinations. They think they're very painful, or they take a long time, or they're overly costly. None of this is true, assuming you're smart in the provider that you go with. At Tonic, we partner with one specific expert determination provider, and it makes it a very smooth process. And typically, it's not something that you need to worry about too much.
Yeah, thanks for adding that on. It's funny because you think expert determination, you think that's going to be much more comprehensive, but it's actually just more targeted and more.
It's more targeted to your use case. Think of safe harbor as a broadsword, whereas expert determination is a scalpel. I think that's a good. Yeah,
that's great.
Oh, a scalpel. That's a good healthcare reference.
There we go.
Excellent. I didn't even think about that.
All right. So on the flip side of being proactive about risk mitigation, what are some of the biggest mistakes you are both seeing organizations make when it comes to data governance or compliance in the realm of generative AI?
Okay. Brad, do you want to take it first, or would you like me to?
I'll let you take that one.
Sure. I think, look, we work with large companies and small companies. I'm gonna speak first about small companies, startups or maybe not a startup, but just a small company. They typically like to jump in to building and productizing things before they perhaps think about some of like the legal and compliance issues. That's a common thing among startups, and it's a flaw in one way, but it's also why they are oftentimes very effective. But in healthcare, you can't play those games. So when you want to go train models on sensitive information, you need to figure out your solution to dealing with the sensitivity up front. You don't want to do it on the back end after the system is built. In the same vein, you need to make sure that like the legal contracts and guidelines that you have in place with your customers allow for what you're doing. And you might be 5 years into your customer journey before you start thinking about these things. Then you start wanting to build this new AI experience. You go back and look at your contracts and like, wait a second, we can't even if we de-identify the data under HIPAA, we still can't do what we want to do because it's forbidden in our contracts. So make sure you're thinking about that kind of stuff up front so that you don't get blocked by, the legal and the compliance down the road.
Yeah,
Yep.
I would certainly echo that. I mean, rather than to kind of think about what mistakes have companies made, I would reframe it as what are the opportunities to ensure that we hit the mark, the first time, or as close as we can. And I think it's absolutely important that we understand that we're using our data correctly and appropriately under the confines of the agreements that are in place. I think it's that's incredibly prudent. I'd say it's also, the other thing to learn lessons from is the things that we see in the news that talk about, data breaches and privacy breaches. There's a lot there that can be learned of what's happening in that space. And there's so much, I'll say, papers and research. If you go to the various societies out there that also talk about, things in the realm of cybersecurity, there's just so much there that can be learned from the shoulders of giants that have already done this, that we can ensure that we bake into the initiatives that we're working on. So
Yeah. All right, so let's move beyond risk. I'd like to consider some specific use cases where I think you can each shed expert light. Brad, this question is for you. How are you seeing healthcare providers leverage domain-specific AI at scale? I'm thinking, for example, you mentioned this earlier, clinical trial design or applications that involve handling large-scale, multimodal patient or subject data.
So certainly what I'm seeing is the creation of these, really large, I'll say large models, like foundational models, that are able to hit the mark for what we're looking for a lot quicker. And so I'll give you an example. We now have on from NVIDIA a model called Vista 3D. Vista 3D is a foundational model for CT that can identify 140 or so different structures within the human body. And so that could be all the vertebrae, it is abdominal organs, it is parts of the cardiovascular system, major muscle groups, parts of the brain, and much more. And we're seeing this work grow up around us, around the world, around what different research groups are doing, around different modalities. We're seeing this, not only for CT, but also for MRI, also for X-ray. We're also seeing the bridging of these models into the language space. And what I mean by that is not only is it pixels in, pixels out, but now we're getting pixels and a query in and text out, which is pretty phenomenal, where I could say, here is an X-ray. What do you see in this image? And having a large vision model come out now and be able to tell me insights that I can find. It's certainly absolutely not diagnostic because that requires its own regulatory process. But these models that are coming out that are informing, I mean, not only in healthcare but across segments all around the world. But we're seeing this come into the healthcare space, and it is incredible. But this does take a phenomenal amount of data. It's taking data from many different organizations, many different modalities and body parts and conditions and diseases and populations of patients in order to be able to craft these things. But it's with that data, with the annotation, with the textual labels that we're able to craft these large foundational models that we could then build the next generation of solutions on. And it's so exciting because we are now able to take this in ways that was very difficult before. I imagine, the use cases of being able to take, here's, an X-ray right from the modality and run it through a large vision model. one day down the road to be able to use those insights to help the radiologist, right? It's never been about replacing what physicians can do. It's really about providing insights that help inform what they can do with this data to drive the clinical practice. So very, very exciting times, and we're just seeing this start to grow up. It's so exciting.
And you said it was more difficult before, but I'm imagining there are still challenges in using medical imaging data to train advanced models. Could you speak more to the challenges that we're still encountering?
I'd say that the challenges that we're encountering is it's not around the technology per se anymore, because we've learned so much across all industries and creating these frameworks that based on PyTorch and TensorRT, and even on the large language model side, what we're seeing is how do we make this relevant for healthcare? How do we, connect this into the fabric of what's happening with our hospitals? The reality is, healthcare AI moves at the speed of trust. And it's not like I could just say, hey, here's a great foundational model and plunk it into a hospital enterprise and say, okay, everybody, now we got this, go. There's so much change management. There's so much work that we need, it's because this augments what our clinicians are doing. This helps them. It's intended to help them, and in many cases, it hasn't. There's just so much work to be done, but I don't think it's largely around the technology of these models themselves. It's of that integration. It's of that connectivity. It's of that harmonization with what the people are doing. Healthcare ultimately is the ultimate consumer service that is human driven because it's about humans. Mistakes made have dire impacts to humans, but it is driven by humans. And so it's that connectivity that's really going to be not the hard part, but the part that will take a lot of the time.
Yeah. Getting it integrated up and running. Adam, maybe you can share some of what we're seeing on Tonic's side, specific examples of how Tonic Textual has helped a healthcare organization handle PHI safely.
Okay, sure. I'll talk about kind of what the use case of one of our customers that I work with, I'd say fairly frequently. They are training models to summarize patient medical histories. So they have a large number of electronic medical records, and they want to summarize an entire patient's medical history to present it to the provider, so that the provider can kind of get a better idea of what's going on with this patient as they're kind of working with them and making decisions. To build this model to summarize a patient's medical history, and think about how complex that is for a second. Like a patient medical history is a combination of structured data, unstructured data, lab reports, images, x-rays, DICOM. It's everything. It's super multimodal, right? So we need to build a model to summarize all of this, okay? It could be that we're fine-tuning a large language model, or it could be that it's a non-LLM based model, like just a more traditional BERT summarization model. But regardless, we need to generate a training data set, and that's what this customer needs. So because the model that we're going to use is going to be generative, we can't risk training on real PHI because the summarization could omit PHI from the training data set when summarizing someone else's history. So they're using Tonic Textual to generate a safe training data set devoid of customer PHI. It's all synthesized so that they can go train their model without risk of putting PHI into the actual model weights. And that type of experience there, that type of workflow of I have PHI, I need to make it safe so I can train a model is very common among all of our customers, but particularly our healthcare customers. And that's just kind of one example model that we see being built right now.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there are any other use cases you'd highlight outside of the healthcare space and other domains.
I mean, in general, like Tonic Textual, it's got a few use cases. Like the primary one, though, is how do I make my training data safe for model development? The other use cases we typically see are using Textual to kind of like build data pipelines for like RAG systems and vector databases. There's data pipelining functionality we have around like building out large training data sets. There's these new features we have around like give me 10 documents, I give you back 100 synthetic documents, like maybe not 100, maybe 10 million, whatever, but give me some documents, I give you back more synthetic documents. And then there's just more traditional things we do around identifying sensitive information in things like PDFs and DICOM and images and Word documents, and giving back redacted or synthetic PDFs and images to customers for various, testing purposes. Yeah.
So it's interesting because I'm hearing both of you talk with so much more enthusiasm, like just excitement for what's possible now. I started off the webinar talking about guardrails, but it's clear that these guardrails are in no way a barrier to what we're able to do. So I'm wondering, in your opinion, this is kind of my last question prior to going into some audience questions. In your opinion, what's next for healthcare AI with all this new capability in leveraging and building domain-specific models? What can we do now that we couldn't do before?
I am so excited. I mean, yes, you could hear my enthusiasm. I am watching the industry innovate on a daily basis. It is incredible. And just to touch on guardrails really quick, guardrails are so important for us as we build these solutions to keep our large language models from hallucinating, from giving guidance that it's not supposed to staying on topic. As we craft these agents, which is the piece that I'm so excited about, we need to make sure that an agent that specializes in booking appointments does not go off and give medical advice, which is not appropriate for it to do. And we have to, as we craft these solutions, we have to always remember intended use, which is how we construct healthcare applications, where we say, this is my application. This is how it's intent to be used. And that's what's used, for things like, for regulatory purposes, et cetera. What I'm excited about from a technology perspective is this, we've seen, we hear the buzzwords about agentic workflows and digital agents. I think that is so exciting. What we're seeing right now is this movement to be able to take these agents to help us in all these different use cases where working in healthcare is difficult. So, for example, when I go and book an appointment to see my family physician, it is a process. Or when I'm going through and getting registered into a clinic and being asked, what is my insurance, and where's my identification, and do I have any allergies? These are things that we can work with digital agents to help inform, rather than have the patients have to come into a clinic to do, basic, like, what allergies do I have? Let's say I'm getting ready for a surgery in a few weeks and they're doing a fit up. Rather than having to come into the hospital and have physical meetings to do what amounts to something that we could do over the phone, or what amounts to that a digital agent can help with. We could do these things electronically at the convenience of the patient to inform the health records we have at the hospitals to collect and maintain that information. So I think that we now have these foundational models that we can do incredible things, and now we're seeing the industry rise to the challenge and say, now that we've got these incredible APIs and SDKs and services, how do we put them in service of our patients, in service of our physicians, of our healthcare enterprises? And like I said, we're seeing innovations daily, and it's incredible. And I can't wait to see what happens, in a few weeks with GTC coming up, or over the summertime, or by the end of the year. That the types of breakthroughs that we're going to see is just going to be phenomenal.
I'll give an answer quickly, Kiara, but I'm going to do it real fast because I really want folks in the audience to also be able to ask us some questions. So I think I'm excited for two things. The first is I'm excited to see what comes in 2025 for being able to generate synthetic data. Brad says 2025 is the year of synthetic data. Brad, I agree with you. I hope we're both right. I'm also excited. There is somewhat of an impedance mismatch between the rate of innovation of these AI systems and what different industries are willing to kind of like take on and start using. And I see that impedance mismatch starting to lessen, meaning organizations and like either in healthcare or other industries, they are getting the regulatory guardrails and frameworks in place so they can take advantage of new technology faster. And I think that will have just as much of an effect on kind of like, the effectiveness of AI systems in healthcare over the next year or two as the improvements of models themselves, actually.
Well, it definitely sounds like an interesting year ahead for data synthesis, for healthcare AI, all of this. All right, I'm going to jump over to audience questions because we do have a fair number. One that caught my eye right off the bat is, what can we define as benefits that would be higher than the perceived risk of using sensitive private data beyond the public data already used to train LLMs?
It comes down to like, okay, does your domain specific model, is it able to do things that an open foundational model cannot do? And if it can do those things, okay, well, how valuable is that to you? And is it worth, the effort of building it and following the guardrails? Brad, anything else to say there?
I would say that the in those cases, what is so important is that we mitigate the risk, right? I wouldn't say, well, this is more risky and therefore, but the gain is there. So therefore, I'm going to do something risky. It's going to be much more on the gain is there. How do I do this in a way that is safe? And using technologies like what Tonic does is a phenomenal way to mitigate those risks so that we could then go forward and then derive the benefits from doing that. So, I mean, everything comes down to that matrix of, pros and cons and, those kinds of things. I think where we see the difference is, if we're using generalized foundational models and we're recognizing that we're not getting far enough, that we have to do something better that requires domain-centric data. At first, it's, I guess admission is the first step. And right. And then we can go off and say, okay, well, now that we know that we have to do this, how do we do this in a way that's going to be safe and cost effective and appropriate using, the data and the workflows that we have.
But Brad, remember the stepping stones that you outlined earlier, prompts, I think you said then LoRa's and then RAG and then the fine tuning. I think that definitely applies there as well.
100%.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of questions that we had that we also have some typed answers too, but I'm going to ask them to you as well. Are you aware of any healthcare systems or software companies licensing healthcare domain specific LLMs that have been trained on de-identified patient data from different countries or institutions? If so, what are the specific considerations and questions that we should be asking, and how to evaluate quality, accuracy benchmarks and applicability to the US population?
I don't know off the top of my head any LLM providers that offer that type of model at the moment. But if they're, Brad, do you know one?
So I know of one for sure, and that is out there from a company called Ryder. They make a healthcare foundational model called Palmyra Med. So that is one that I know of for sure.
I have heard of that. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
There are others that I've heard and seen up on Hugging Face that are more kind of in the open source space. So I do see that. From different countries around the world, I have seen large language models generally from other countries. I've seen some papers done in the healthcare space around that, but I'm not sure of commercially available models.
Right.
I think that's kind of a different story. But the second part of that question, and I think
that's the interesting part.
That's the interesting part, exactly,
Yeah.
right? So I've seen, and I'm very excited about it. This rise of frameworks to be able to test these foundational models, these large language models, to measure their efficacy. Because before that, that was a huge problem that we say, well, hey, I mean, I can give it a bunch of symptoms and it tells me the diagnosis and it's right. But I don't know how it got there. I have no idea. Right.
Right.
That does not mean that I could then safely use it within my, to start treating patients. Absolutely not. We need to be able to grade these systems, to test these systems, to vet these systems, and I need frameworks to be able to do that. And so I've worked with, for example, Chai is a phenomenal group that's working on healthcare AI frameworks. And things like model cards and testing frameworks. I've seen software solutions come out just even the last few weeks. So super exciting that we're seeing this happen because it's going to be a necessary thing to take this to the next level.
Right. I think there's a lot of vendors out there now and open source offerings for helping you kind of like evaluate and validate the quality of RAG systems and outputs from large language models in general. We have an open source offering in this space called Tonic Validate. Everyone's welcome to go check it out on GitHub. But Brad, I think you're right. Like the harder challenge there to me is more the explainability that's really required whenever you're doing anything around patient decisions. And I haven't seen a lot in that area yet. And I think that's tricky. And if you want FDA, if you want to make the FDA happy, you'll need to do that.
You'll need to do that. I think that there is the rise of these reasoning frameworks. So
Yeah.
DeepSeek, for example, with the reasoning framework there, and pitching it questions and then watching it reason why it's going to make the response that it makes before it makes that response is super important. But at the same time, evaluating the reasoning behind to ensure that it's sound is something that becomes really important. And how do we craft that in the various phases, both, pre-market and post-market? How do we, put the guardrails on when it's being used, I'll say in production, depending on, whether it's clinically or not is a separate conversation. But
Right.
also doing that vetting even before and that assessment, we need the tooling to be able to do that. And we're seeing that grow up now in ways that, even like last year or the year before, the industry just wasn't there yet. So it's
Right.
it's coming.
I mean, even a month ago, I mean, DeepSeek being fully open source and having reasoning, I mean that alone is a game changer for this explainability that we kind of require.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe still the only open source model with that. I don't quote me on that, but definitely the one that everyone knows.
Yeah.
We had a ton more questions from the audience. I think we've gotten to some of them via typed answers, but we're coming up on the top of the hour. So I want to make sure I get my last question in for both of you. What is one key takeaway each of you wants the audience to remember about building domain-specific AI with private data?
I'll take a swing at it first, I guess. All right. So I think the takeaways are you kind of got to, if you're going to build domain-specific models on sensitive information, whether it's healthcare information or other, doesn't really matter. You need to deal with the privacy and ethical questions and the legal questions up front so that you don't get bit by it, after you're done kind of building and designing what you have in mind. You need a way to essentially train your models on data that is not going to leak or regurgitate any sensitive information from your training data set. There's various approaches to doing this. Tonic Textual's approach is a combination of identifying sensitive entities and then creating highly realistic synthetic results that essentially don't hurt model training efficacy. And there's other approaches as well, surely, but that's what we take and that's what we do, and I believe that to be the best. So if you need that type of work done, reach out to us, go to Tonic.ai, create an account, try it out, and I'm sure, Kiara, we have ways for folks to contact us in other ways if necessary.
Yeah, I'll be dropping a link soon. We'll be dropping a link soon in the chat. Brad.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would echo all of that. I think it's, as we approach any sort of problem in this space, we need to know why we're doing it. What are we hoping to get out of it? How do we de-risk the development process, the training process, so that at the end of this entire exercise that we have something that we could effectively use that's safe, that's appropriate, that's free of bias, that it kind of checks all the boxes for a proper solution. And I always go back to an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If we don't do this up front, it will be far more expensive and risky to the organization creating it. And handling this up front is going to be so critical in order to have a design win, a design success at the end of the day.
So what I'm hearing is get your ducks in order because 2025 is going to be a great year for data synthesis and you want to make sure that you're leveraging that.
There we go.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. This has been such a comprehensive discussion on a topic that I truly believe should be leading the AI conversation right now. So thank you for your time and your insight. I see gratitude coming in from the audience as well. With this new knowledge and understanding, what are the next steps for those of us looking to further our AI solutions? I recommend visiting build.nvidia.com to explore NVIDIA's reasoning models and domain-specific healthcare models. We'll drop a link to that in the chat. You can also get up and running with a free trial of Tonic Textual, as Adam mentioned, to redact and synthesize your unstructured data for secure use in AI development. Just visit tonic.ai/textual and you can get started there. So yeah, check out NVIDIA's healthcare models, check out Tonic Textual for secure data synthesis. Thank you, Brad and Adam, truly appreciate it. And thanks to everyone for joining us today and for all of your great questions. It's been great. I hope to see you the next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.